Dr. Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
My pleasure to be on.
Over the last several years, we've become increasingly aware of the use of pronouns and how we use them. And we've become more aware of gender-neutral pronouns, Dr. Shabir. So the question is, when we turn to God, what are God's pronouns? I understand that many churches are starting to think about this, and they're referring to God in different ways, like Godself or they or she. So, Dr. Shabir, what about in Islam?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me think a little bit more with you about that wider context before we come to the Islamic solution to this.
Mm-hmm.
Because is there a problem? Now, in some other faiths, there is a recognizable problem because God is definitely referred to as a masculine entity.
Mm-hmm.
In what is referred to as the Lord's Prayer, which I recited as a schoolboy for many years, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, and so on, definitely God is addressed as Father.
Mm-hmm.
And one wants to know, why not Mother? And a modern solution to that has been proposed to say, let's say our parent. Our divine parent. So in that case, it's not identifying a particular gender. And or some people may even be wondering, even to this day, why should this even be an issue? So let me clarify that as well. It becomes an issue because if we imagine God as being male, then it means that the best thing we can imagine is actually masculine. And it sort of rubs off on us to make us think that masculinity is better than femininity.
Mm-hmm.
And that leaves one half of the world's population thinking, well, wait a minute, are we like second class? Like, why is God masculine to begin with, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why isn't God feminine, or why isn't he neutral, or something like this? So, and it has an effect. Of course, we can't prescribe for God what he has to be, but one can well imagine if God had been something different, then it would mean much more for women if we imagine God to be masculine. So that's where a problem is experienced, and then a larger discussion flows out of that. And naturally, Muslims are not immune from that discussion, especially when we have in the Quran, the pronoun used for God is often he. Which never the feminine hiya. So it's huwa in Arabic, but never hiya.
Mm-hmm. Although God does refer to God as we.
As
right?
we, yes, in the plural.
Mm-hmm.
That's in the personal pronoun.
Mm-hmm.
So the personal pronoun may be singular, may be plural. But the third person pronoun for God is always he.
Mm-hmm. It's always huwa.
Huwa,
Which
yes.
doesn't necessarily translate into he always, right?
True. Because the Arabic huwa, is part and parcel of the Arabic language. So let me explain that. In English, the nouns do not have what we call grammatical gender. Few nouns do. Like if we speak about Great Britain, we might refer to that country as she.
Mm-hmm.
We might refer to a ship using the pronoun she. Not meaning that the ship is somehow feminine, but that's just how the language evolves, and that's the common usage. So in Arabic, this is everything is like every noun is grammatically either masculine or feminine. Few nouns can work both ways, and sometimes a noun has what looks like a grammatically feminine indicator at the end, but is actually used for what is biologically masculine. So we can think about people. People are biologically, in the Arab tradition, masculine, feminine, but inanimate objects are also masculine and feminine. So the sun, Shams, is feminine. The moon, Al-Qamar, is masculine, not necessarily having to do anything with masculinity or femininity, but that's just how the nouns are treated. So when we're dealing with a masculine noun, then the pronouns, the verbs, and everything follows from the fact that we're dealing with a masculine noun. So, chair is masculine, sayyara, car is feminine, and so on. So on and on it goes. So when we speak of God and refer to him as huwa, he, in Arabic, that doesn't necessarily mean that he is masculine. But of course, it doesn't deny. But in Islamic tradition, we conceive of God as being beyond such distinctions as masculinity or femininity. because to us, those will be limiting descriptions of God. So because if he's one thing but not the other, that seems to be a limitation. And God is all-encompassing. He is beyond our imagination. And we should not, in the Islamic tradition, imagine God to be like us. So even if we speak about the hand of God, we don't imagine that he has a hand similar to our hand. Some theologians even prefer to speak not of the hand at all, but to say, well, if we speak about hand, we're just using a metaphor for power, because when we say that something is not in my hand, or not in my hands, we mean I don't have power over that thing. It doesn't mean we're talking literally about whether the thing is physically in my palm or not. Or in the English expression, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. It doesn't mean that you have to have the bird in your hand. You could have the bird in a cage, for example. Not that you should, but that's how the metaphor is used.
Dr. Shabir, what about pronouns? So I see that a lot of Christian churches are having a lot of debate about this, and they're coming up with different names, like Godself, for example, or referring to God as they, or perhaps as she. What do you think of those references?
Well, it's an interesting way of trying to get over that problem. So what might we do as Muslims that's comparable? We can refer to God as our creator. So we don't have to say he or even invent she. We can just say our creator. And that in that case, we are not attributing a particular gender using the English terms. And here we have the difficulty in English, that in English, definitely when we use the term he, we're referring to a male person. When we use she, we're referring to a female person. And when we use it, we're referring to an inanimate object. So if we wanted a neutral term for God as a pronoun in English, we wouldn't want to go to it, because it would seem to indicate an inanimate object. And we don't want to portray God as that. And
what about they?
If we use they, this could be confusing to Muslims, because we emphasize monotheism, that there is only one God. So if we start using they, then the children might start thinking that there's more than one God out there. The Quran, of course, uses we in self-reference to God, but that's another issue that
the royal
causes.
We.
Yeah, it's a royal we, and that causes young Muslims to ask, like, what is this we? And that has to be explained. So we don't want to introduce another thing that needs to be explained.
We could just avoid using pronouns and keep using nouns, right? Say God at all times.
So you can repeat the word God. So usually the pronoun stands in the place of the noun to avoid repeating the noun all of the time, because then it becomes like
repetitive,
cacophonous or repetitive. To avoid that, the pronouns are useful. But then if that's causing its own problems, we can repeat the noun. There was something more that I think is vital to this discussion that I don't see in much of the Muslim writings that I've been able to find on the web and so on, where Muslims are saying, okay, so we use huwa and we'll keep using huwa, but it doesn't mean that we're referring to God as he. What needs to be understood, I think, is the wider perspective that in Islamic tradition it is recognized that God sent prophets to every people, speaking the languages of various peoples. So if there was a language that had a neutral term that could have been used as a pronoun for God, then probably it was already used. So that means it's not taboo. It's just that in English we don't have that neutral term, and in Arabic we don't seem to have it. But can one develop? Yes, and in that case, Muslims will be well within their faith to use such a term that will not give an incorrect meaning, and at the same time will be inclusive, so that everyone feels as attached to God as we should be.
Interesting insights, Dr. Shabir. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
If you enjoyed this video, click like and subscribe, and please donate to support our work at QuranSpeaks.com.